Imagine, just for a second, a major Indian metropolis completely paralyzed by sudden floods. Or maybe it's reeling from a record-breaking heat wave. Terrifying, right? But the reality is, we're seeing these scenarios happen way more often. And honestly, it demands a massive shift in how we handle emergencies. Welcome to our explainer on the Disaster Management Amendment Bill of 2024. Today, we're going to break down exactly how this new legislation attempts to fix our vulnerabilities, turning what looks like a dense policy into a strategic analysis briefing for you.
The big picture context. 2. Architecture of the bill. 3. Mechanisms and system control. 4. Critical gaps and challenges. 5. The strategic way forward. 6. Final exam revision. Let's get right into it.
Section 1, the big picture context, the paradigm shift. Before we try to memorize specific clauses, we really need to understand the fundamental shift driving this whole bill. For decades, the approach to disasters was pretty much reactive, a cyclone hits, and then we hand out relief. But the absolute biggest pivot of the 2024 bill is moving completely away from that. It focuses heavily on proactive disaster risk reduction. It's a massive, structural move from just managing the messy aftermath to actively reducing our vulnerability before a crisis even has a chance to strike. It's all about building long-term resilience. Section 2, Architecture of the Bill, New Institutions. So how exactly does this bill restructure the actual bodies handling these emergencies? Well, tracing the evolution of our crisis governance shows a really clear trend. Pre-2005, we relied heavily on executive committees. Then, the 2005 Act gave us the national and state disaster management authorities. And now, the 2024 amendment steps it up by granting formal, legal teeth, statutory status to those older committees, and crucially, it introduces entirely new localized bodies. It's fascinating to watch the architecture adapt to these modern, complex threats we're facing. The real game changer here is the creation of Urban Disaster Management Authorities, or UDMAs. Think of these as localized first responders designed specifically for state capitals and major municipal cities. By getting municipal commissioners and district collectors directly involved, the bill is basically acknowledging a hard truth. Our rapidly growing urban centers are incredibly vulnerable, and they absolutely need dedicated, hyper-local command centers. Building on that, the bill empowers state governments to formally set up their own state disaster response forces, essentially mirroring the national level to boost local muscle. Plus, the National Crisis Management Committee and the High-Level Committee finally get that statutory status we just talked about, really cementing their authority. Oh, and the National Disaster Management Authority itself, it gains the crucial autonomy to figure out its own staffing needs and appoint experts directly. The whole idea is just tightening the gears of governance, making it a much smoother machine.
Section 3, Mechanisms and System Control, Turning the Gears.
Okay, let's dive into the mechanisms. How does this new structure actually enforce its plans on the ground? Well, there's a fascinating and honestly kind of controversial new tool called Section 60A. It gives governments the power to direct individuals to take or not take specific actions to reduce a disaster's impact. And if you don't comply, there's a penalty of up to 10,000 rupees. Now, the goal here is definitely not to just generate revenue for the government. Not at all. It's a strict behavioral mechanism designed to enforce compliance at the grassroots level during that absolutely critical window of an emergency. Another massive upgrade is the mandate for comprehensive national and state disaster databases. And look, this isn't just some simple list of events. This system is going to systematically track the entire life cycle of a crisis. We're talking everything from the initial damage assessments to fund allocations, tracking literally every single rupee spent, right through to the long-term preparedness plans. It is a huge, huge push for data-driven accountability.
Section 4, Critical Gaps and Challenges, Analytical Layers.
Now, every policy has its limitations, right? To truly master this topic, we've got to analyze the friction points. The biggest critique analysts point to is a major structural contradiction. See, on one hand, the bill heavily centralizes power, adding more national authorities and kind of diluting the specific usage guidelines for the National Disaster Response Fund. That can seriously complicate the chain of command and delay responses when every second counts. But on the other hand, those vital new local UDMAs we were just praising, they are essentially starved of the dedicated local funding and resources they need to actually function. You're left with a heavy top and a totally unsupported base.
But even more concerning is what the bill leaves out entirely. Despite major international commitments like the Sendai Framework and the Paris Agreement, the legislation completely fails to thoroughly integrate climate change impacts. And honestly, shockingly, heat waves, which, as we know, are increasingly devastating across India, are still not included as a notified disaster under this act. It's a glaring blind spot for sure in a framework that's supposed to secure our future against modern threats.
Section 5. The strategic way forward. Building resilience.
So, knowing these immense challenges, what's the actual solution? How do we strategically bridge these gaps? Well, the roadmap to genuine resilience involves a few critical upgrades. First, we absolutely must hardwire disaster risk reduction directly into our urban planning. Next, we need to leverage ISRO and IMD technology to create flawless early warning systems. We also should implement a strict, unforgiving 72-hour rapid response plan for those crucial golden hours of a crisis. Plus, we need serious R&D investment in AI for predictive modeling, and, this is a big one, we must formally integrate psychological rehabilitation into our recovery policies to support the people actually affected. And regarding that structural imbalance we noted a minute ago, a vital correction is required. To really make this work, we have to invert the current centralization trend. We need a resource balance that heavily favors local empowerment. Why? Because when a crisis hits, the local authorities are the true first responders on the ground. Autonomy and funding at the grassroots level isn't just a nice-to-have, it is a strategic necessity.
Section 6. Final exam revision. Concept mastery.
All right, we've covered the history, the mechanics, the flaws, and the solutions. Let's pull it all together into a high-impact revision matrix to lock in your understanding. Take a mental screenshot of these 5 foundational pillars. 1. The core shift is toward proactive disaster risk reduction. 2. The key institutional changes are the new urban authorities and state response forces. 3. Control is exerted through database tracking and that new Section 60A penalty. 4. The primary flaws are over-centralization and an unsupported local base. And 5. The glaring omission is leaving out climate-driven heat waves. If you understand these 5 points, you have absolutely mastered this policy.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to analyze on your own. As climate change rapidly rewrites the rules of nature, bringing unprecedented and hyper-local crises, can a heavily centralized disaster architecture effectively protect a nation as vast and diverse as India? Is centralization our best shield, or could it be our most dangerous vulnerability? Thank you for joining this explainer. Keep connecting the ideas, and as always, stay curious.